Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, also on Roku TV. We're proud to host this show all around the world, and I am the host of this show, World Edition. On World Edition, we talk about global affairs, innovation, our move towards a new normal, as here in the United States, we are actually moving to a new phase of the pandemic. And today, we welcome you from all over the world. Before I begin my monologue, we'll all be watching with keen eyes as I greet you live today from Morrisville, the All America city in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States. And speaking of North Carolina, the Tar Heels. Go Carolina. I'm the proud parent of a Tar Heel who is a junior in Carolina, taking the year off as a gap year. We're very proud of our daughter Sonia, as she is with refugees in El Paso, coming back next week, and then she's off to Greece. Speaking of rivalries, we saw a great victory of Carolina over Duke, and we were quite excited. It was a great, great game, and we wish Coach K all the best in his retirement. He's been an inspiration to many of us here in the U.S. and in North Carolina particularly. And as I said on the last show, this is more than just basketball. It's really about bringing the best athletes from around the world, from around the country, vying for the national championship. I can't think of a better time for us to be celebrating positive things, great sports, great athletes, and the ability to come together for a common goal. We need more teamwork politically in the United States, that's for sure. Today, my insights I want to share with you very briefly are about what's going on in other European countries. We've heard President Biden say repeatedly that the war in Ukraine is about autocracy versus democracy. But we don't have to look very far to see that this same battle between autocracy and democracy is going on in many European nations, not through war, but through elections. These three countries are Hungary, Serbia, and France. Hungary is the first dictatorship that used to be a democracy, run by Viktor Orban, who was elected in 2010. We've seen over the years the slide towards more of an autocratic government. Viktor Orban has actually been very similar to Putin in his behavior, stacking the courts to favor his elections, even willingness to overturn elections, and he had just won. His opposing party usually only gets about 50% of the vote, so it looks like he's changed the rules of the game in democracy, which is something going on in the U.S., so he can stay in power as long as he wants. The next is Serbia. Serbia is being run by a leader. I'm going to get the name real quick. Sorry, I'm having issues with my notes today. Serbia's leader is Alexander Vucic, and he has helped Putin and Orban as role models. He used them as role models. After becoming president in 2017, he helped turn Serbia's media into basically a propaganda machine, and there's no free media. Now, he hasn't really been against the sanctions, but he's definitely been more pro-Russia. And keep in mind, Viktor Orban is completely pro-Russia. The final is France. And today, French go to the polls. The incumbent, obviously, is Macron, who is dealing with gas prices, rising prices, inflation, and maybe on the heels of a much deeper recession in Europe because of the pandemic. The war has caused tremendous economic turbulence in Europe and France because of the sanctions on Russian oil. While Macron has focused on trying to find a diplomatic solution in Ukraine, his opponent, Marine Le Pen, is the hard-right candidate. She's been pro-Russia for much of her career, and she's focusing completely on cost of living issues, which are resonating with millions of French people. We'll be watching this election with very close eyes. The point I'm trying to make is this. As we begin this show today, we want to talk about democracy versus autocracy. What are the signs and signals of democracy going awry? Do we need to be aware of these signals in the United States? And most importantly, is this something that can be stopped? Or are we going to start seeing this all around the world, especially as Putin, who's still waging war against Ukraine, is willing to kill hundreds and thousands of innocent Ukrainians in his quest to conquer Ukraine and bring it back in. Secretary of State Blinken and other leaders like former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were on Meet the Press saying that they believe the longer the war wages on, Putin is in trouble. And there's even been some rumors about what a post-Putin Russia would look like. But I believe that we should tread with caution. There is no way the premier of Russia will be quitting anytime soon. He's in this thing for the long haul. He's in to break down Ukraine, to disrupt democracy, and to serve as a role model to many of the autocratic nations that I have mentioned today, that autocracy, dictatorship, is the government of the present and the government of the future. Maybe President Biden and the other allies in Europe may have something to say about that and something to do about that. Today, I bring in with me Mark Lee, my co-host.
Yeah. And we've also got Nick with us, of course, the one of the founders of the network and all of that. So we're going to bring Nick on. By the way, speaking of sports, before we get to other news of importance and all of that, I also want to give a shout out not just to Carolina, who was playing for Kansas, but also to Dawn Staley, the South Carolina Gamecock coach, and her team did win the national championship last night. And I did watch the tail end of that game. They beat the team of Connecticut, which of course we know has a rich legacy, but has not had the kind of team that they've had in the past. And actually, they went wire to wire. I think they were number one at the beginning of the season and ended the season number one as well. So give them a shout out. And Nick will be glad to know that one of the young ladies actually has her own clothing line. I think it's called Anything Possible or something along those lines. So it's interesting watching these young people that are also entrepreneurs when they go into the sports realm. So like I said, I'm sure that you'll get a WNBA contract, and she's had like 26 points and all of that. But definitely it was interesting as I was watching the interview and hearing that she had her own clothing line. So she wasn't necessarily thinking of just sports as the only route to go into the whole notion of what happens after you get out of college if you are an athlete. So I was glad to hear that she had some other things going on in the sense of business. And who knows, maybe I'll even reach out to her and see if she wants to be a guest on our show at some point or another. And the other thing that I was curious to get out of the sports mindset that I was going to talk to you about, Steve, is that, and I was hoping Nick would come back. I know he's trying to get some of our other guests to join us as well. But one of the things I was going to talk to you about is, guess what? The media is being blamed again, or at least our media as well, because speaking of the Ukraine and that situation, the world has been looking at the horrors of what's going on there and innocent civilians being killed and all of that. And of course, Russia's defense ministry said photographs and videos published by Ukrainian authorities alleging, quote unquote, these crimes by troops in Boka were a provocation and no residents suffered violence at the hands of Russians. Russian Foreign Ministry then went further, saying the footage had been ordered by the United States as part of a plot to blame Russia. But Mars Johnson said no denial or disinformation from the Kremlin can conceal that President Vladimir Putin is desperate and his invasion is fallen. And so on Monday, the footage of these various dead citizens was part of the whole news stories. And of course, this is what is going on. Ministry spokesman Mariah Zakharov said in an interview on state television late on yesterday that, of course, who are the masters of provocation? Of course, the United States and NATO. And so that's just the way that sometimes people in the middle of a war will try to turn the war into like a propaganda thing.
Well, I mean, first of all, and we're waiting for our guests to come. And I first of all, we wish Carolina all the best today. And we're watching it with open. We wear my Carolina gear all day today. I was actually at the Carolina Hurricanes game. I'm working. Remind everyone, too, that Elaine Marshall will be here with us on April 6th on Wednesday for a special edition of the North Carolina Secretary of State. And we'd like to get her opinion about democracy. North Carolina's Secretary of State does not oversee elections, but they are responsible for, business formation. But she's actually traveling to Moldova, so we're going to be talking to her. That we have a Sister Cities program, so she has a familiarity with Ukraine. So some of my questions will be also about getting her perspective as someone that's been over there and its influence on the economy. And tomorrow I'll begin my monologue on a story on obviously who wins the Carolina game, but I'm sharing my op-ed on Tech Wire on Misha Sevitz, which is getting a a lot of takers in the news media reaching me wanting to do a story about a Ukrainian
And
PhD.
we see that Nick is back as well,
Yeah,
and we also see that Sasha's with us.
So we're going to begin. So Sasha, my monologue today was based on the fact that autocracy versus dictatorships, and that we're seeing some of this not being done by elections in other parts of the world, most notably Viktor Orban in Hungary, who just won, the head of Serbia, and now France, where he is being Macron is being challenged by Marine Le Pen, who is a pro-Russia person, and of course Viktor Orban has been against providing weapons to Ukraine. So, do you believe that, and also assistance, and has not been supporting? Do you believe that this is being encouraged by Putin? That that they're looking at this guy, or do you think they're making these reasons for economic reasons that they just want Russian oil?
Putin is trying to do anything to divide the West, and for that purpose, East and just all universe. So he would be always on top of his game. And I'm really surprised now when there is a real chance that Ukraine can actually not just resist Putin, they can really defeat him. And I'm surprised that all free world is not taking that as an opportunity to get rid of this dictator once and for all. And all Ukraine needs is a heavy artillery, tanks, planes, anything in that nature. And in this case, if it will have it, it will have a decisive victory. It will get Russia out of Ukraine, and then all the talks about geopolitics, the sea powers and land powers and all will go down in smoke. All Putin's theory, those of Professor Dugin, and all this bullshit will be defeated once and for all. That's it.
So we have a guest, Sasha. Thank you. Before we get to the other guests, we have a guest, Mika Irfan. Mark, could you introduce him, please?
Well, I'm trying to find out who the guest is as well. Maybe Nick can
He's
tell
my
us
guest.
about it as well. So, Nick,
okay, Nick,
usually I let the guests introduce themselves. So, Mika.
Yes, hello. I joined in.
Tell us a little about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do.
In the middle of that passionate speech. So I'm a student at the University of Houston. I write for the school newspaper, and I'm in a leadership position in our Democratic Party. I actually met Kim on an airplane, and we had the most interesting discussion ever. So she invited me to be a part of this wonderful show.
We appreciate you being here. We do have a quick question, and this is actually for everybody. And actually, I think I'll direct this toward Nick and everything. There's a lot of talk, and Sasha may have some interesting thoughts about this as well, that about Vladimir Putin being definitely a war criminal. A lot of people are saying that that's not a strict legal judgment as of yet, but the evidence keeps growing. The Ukraine officials over the weekend said they had discovered a mass grave in the Kiev suburb of Boka, and journalists visiting the city described its streets as strewn with the bodies of civilians apparently executed by retreating Russian forces. And the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, said that this is genocide, and definitely outside observers are calling for prosecutions, including Carla DePoint, a former war crime prosecutor, and definitely that particular person was calling for authorities to issue an international arrest warrant against Putin. My question to Nick, as a lawyer, is how easy is it to actually convict a war criminal if they are found guilty of these crimes? Or is this something that a lot of times is given lip service, but is not as easy to do as it sounds and all of that? And I don't know if Sasha wants to step in as a former resident of Ukraine to say what he thinks about this notion of going after him as a war criminal. But Nick, how easy is it to convict somebody of being a war criminal?
Depends if you win the war or not. In other words, he who has the gold makes the rules. He who takes over countries make the rules. So in Germany, when we defeated Germany, we convicted a lot of the people for war crimes. Now let's move it to the current situation. Well, when are we going to take over Russia? Come on. Or who's going to take over Russia and convict anybody of war crimes? So it's more, again, the media war that goes on in this war. I think, Mark, than it is reality. In other words, any convictions. What they're trying to do is highlight that. Now, on the other side, there's always two. Remember, his story, her story, and somewhere the truth. The other side, because I go to Understanding China, and you have all the what I call apologists. In other words, people that take different positions. Their position was this: there wasn't any war crimes. These were people that were civilians taking up arms against the Russians. And so what they did is they killed them because they were fighting the Russians. So, there's always two sides to this story, his story, her story, and what the truth is. What the truth is will eventually, hopefully, come out in some form or fashion, but you'll never get the whole story unless you're actually there. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But what it does, like I said, I believe there's three wars going on. There's the economic war, which is what we're doing on sanctions. There's the media war, what people's perceptions are, world public opinion. And then there's the hot war that's going on. So we really have three wars going on.
Yep. So Mika, what is your perspective? First of all, I appreciate your work with the paper. I'm a daughter of a UNC Tar Heel journalism major who's on a gap year actually in El Paso right now, welcoming refugees. So I sort of know how ambitious and energetic you are. But what is your perspective as a young leader and for tomorrow, for the future of our country, just about everything going on in America, the war in Ukraine? I mean, what is your, we always hear from adults, but what is your perspective as someone much younger than all of us?
Oh, I really appreciate that. I know the last question was about international courts. It's sad that even if this was a war crime, any sort of conviction would be completely ineffective. We know international courts, their conclusions really don't matter as much as I think we'd all like them to. South China's been convicted for being wrong in the South China Sea. Did that change their behavior at all? Of course not, right? It's just a court. The UN has absolutely no legal power whatsoever. The only little power they have is kind of mostly symbolic, and their budget, which is made up of mostly donations, effectively. In terms of the war in Russia, it's clear that Russia made a big mistake. The one thing that is really sad, that I think is really unfortunate about the West behavior, is we have done a lot of sanctions. We have had a full economic warfare, as we're calling it. But oil and gas is still being bought by Europe, right? There's still a lot of money going into Russia, which is allowing their currency to actually stabilize. Their stock market has recovered a bit. Now they're taking some draconian actions to ensure this is the case. But if we really wanted to facilitate a full and total collapse of the Russian economy and the war effort, Europe would have to stop its addiction to Russian oil, which it just has not done yet. So I would like to see that.
And that makes a lot of sense.
I would like to add something about what you discussed about the war crimes. Everything what's happened in the city of Bucha and other places is well documented. The people, civilians, were held. Their hands were tied behind, and they were killed with a single gunshot in their head. All this is documented. It's beyond any reasonable doubts what's happened and who did that. And all these materials are being forwarded to Hague. Now, to effectively try these war criminals, Nick, you're absolutely right. You have to defeat Russia. And right now, Ukraine is very close to it. So why doesn't want West to help Ukraine to accomplish that? Because the West would have ridiculous victory, which is done by hands and hearts of Ukrainians. See, my opinion is that West doesn't want Ukraine to win. West doesn't, because it will upset Putin and he may use his red button. West doesn't want Russia to win either, so that's why they're helping Ukraine. But only as much as we stand against Russia, get Russia tired with a long war. Apparently, if you think that there will be some kind of someday there will be a peace agreement, they are so far apart. I've read very interesting analysis, in fact, in Russian business newspaper, that they are You have four different discussions. One about the status of Ukraine as neutral country. Another one is about the territory. Another one is about the how much army would Ukraine allowed to have. And there is a fourth dimension to it, the guarantees of the West or so on. If just one of them will not work out, all other three
Right.
null and void, and it doesn't make any sense. So there will be no peace agreement anytime soon, or even not so soon, or even in a year time. There will be no peace agreement. So there is a fight. Who
Now,
would pick to win this fight?
I got a
yeah,
quick
and
question for
go ahead.
Makai really quickly. I'm sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt
please.
you, Steve, but a quick
No.
question for Makai and everything. And I'm glad to have a young voice on the show this time, as Nick alluded to, and as Steve did as well. And we've had some other young guests on some of our other shows. But I was just wondering, as somebody that is a young college student, you've gone through during your high school years and part of your college years, I assume as well. This whole pandemic, you're seeing this war in the Ukraine. You're seeing a number of other things going on, even sometimes maybe your spring break not being what our spring breaks were because of not having those opportunities and all along those lines. So my question is, what is your thought about your future? Because like I said, I don't have any kids, but I do have two young nephews, and sometimes I wonder what to tell them about their future. So I was wondering, what sense do you get of your own future, and what are you hearing from your fellow students and others that are in your age range?
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much. It's also Micah, just so you'll know.
Thank you.
But if I'm going to be honest, pretty bleak for my generation. That is to say, it's clear that there's a bit of a political decline in the United States. People always say we should restore the soul of this nation. We should restore democracy. I know Biden was talking about that. To be honest, America has really struggled kind of throughout its history, just with different demons. Now it's a kind of the new demon. Which is a rise of more extreme politics, a kind of breakdown of the basic fabric of the political system. So I know a lot of young people are just like, this is really bad. It's kind of just a passive joke we make that America is probably going to just absolutely collapse. Now, personally, on the individual level, I'm excited because I'm super interested in seeing what I can do to improve our systems, right? I write not just for the Cougar, but for other organizations and my website about things that we can do to change what we're currently doing to make it better. And so when something's really broken, it's really easy to make it better. And so that's what's exciting for me. But it's definitely not a good situation we're in, but I maintain maybe the unreasonable optimism that we can do absolutely so much better. If people just kind of became aware of the solutions and figured out that it's really in no one's interest to continue down the path we currently.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Well, Nika, we really appreciate that perspective, and I think that maybe the younger generation is the solution we need. People that can bring in some fresh perspectives of how we can fix our problems. I love the analogy you used of the system being broken. I think where we have today, in my opinion, as someone that's also in politics, is a system where the squeaky wheel makes the most noise on both sides. Much of my time is putting out fires, putting out lies that are being told on social media. I'm a moderate Democrat, but I have many Republican and independent friends. But I'm seeing just absolute, lies and untruths being told on social media, and people don't know what to believe anymore. They've lost hope, they've lost faith, and it is a media war in addition to an economic war, a cultural war. I think if we're going to get the soul of the nation back, we need to look each other in the eye. We need to listen to each other, understand that we need to respect our differences and move on. And I simply don't see that happening in many of the political circles that I travel in. To be very honest with you, it's been very, very, very demotivating to me. And there are days where I wonder, is this the right place to be right now? So hopefully you can help me change that apathy. And we'd love to see you run for a higher office one day. But I see this in my own daughter. She's trying to change the world through writing and things like that. And is oftentimes sharing me those perspectives. Do you feel there's hope in America? You think that we can come? What do you think it's going to take to fix the challenges that we have?
That's such an excellent question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Now, first, I'll clarify that I say I'm optimistic. I actually kind of fluctuate between two positions based on the news of the time. Some days I'm really happy because I know things that can be better. I know how broken policies are, and I know how much better the alternatives are. But other days, I kind of wake up to the reality that even though there are solutions, it's very unlikely that we actually implement them just because of how broken the political process is. So I think this is the beginning to change, the start to change, changing how change happens. I think the most broken element of our political system is the system by which decisions are made itself. We have a fully bicameral system, unlike most other countries, because Germany has a neutered bicameral system. The UK has a neutered bicameral system, which allows them to make more effective decisions. We have a first past the post voting system, which does not work. Any political scientist just wants to rip out their hair when they figure out that we still have this, And so I think we have to change these basic systems. We have to implement more innovative voting systems. We have to try to, have more of a unicameral system by which decisions are made, so we don't have to get like two bodies to completely agree on every single decision. And we have to allow more parties to be part of the process, so we don't have such hyper-partisanship.
Mika, thank you for that perspective. Any other questions for Mika? I mean, we always love to have and you can stay with us for the hour. We're going to be
definitely enjoying
we'd love to have a useful insight as we go issue by issue. But let's go into our next issue, and I want Mika to kind of be involved in the discussion. But so we talked about, these autocracies in other countries, but let's talk about here's my first issue of the day, and of course I'm going to use this as a challenge to bring Shaquille Latimer on the show. Over coffee just this week, I had a argument with a family member and friend who is arguing that President Trump would have been better, that all the problems in America are because of Joe Biden, whether it's inflation, the war in Ukraine, the economy. And I'm going to go here for the defense of President Biden to say, yeah, he may not have done the best job of communicating to the American people, but let's face the music here. First of all, he took a nation that was only 14% vaccinated and got 65% of the country vaccinated. He was able to pull off a $1.5 billion infrastructure bill, which is investing in our roads and bridges, providing broadband, those kinds of things. He was able to, before that, provide the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act, provide funding. Yes, there is inflation. The Republicans argue inflation because he poured too much money into the system, but I think the inflation was because of the supply chain disruptions. And then finally, Ukraine. And I wanted the panelists to weigh in on this. With Ukraine, the way I look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't President Trump against NATO? Didn't he want an isolationist foreign policy? And so at the end of the day, would we have been providing Ukraine the assistance through allied efforts, even though they're not a member of NATO? I say no. So, and then the final point is he wasn't reelected to a second term. And there's only 5 presidents of the United States that weren't reelected in the last 40 years of our nation's history. So how is it that the people, at least in North Carolina, where Mark and I live, they're running on the endorsement of Donald Trump? So guys, I'm sorry. Look, I'm not saying that it's bad to have some of the Republican views, but Sasha, I'm going to start with you. And of course, this is a one-sided conversation. Hopefully, I'm encouraging Shaquille Latimer. But Sasha, do you think I'm off point here and giving the president a B plus or A minus grade as our commander in chief?
I think Trump is a unique individual who, beside being a president of the United States, he should have been president of at least 20, 30 other countries as well. He should have been General Secretary of the United Nations. He should have been president of every major corporation in America, starting with General Motors and obviously YouTube, I'm talking about Google, I'm talking about Facebook, I'm talking about everything. And all these companies would have to change their names to Trump Corporation, Trump Technical Corporation, Trump Electrical Corporation, Trump Transportation Corporation, and so on and on. So everything in this world would be nothing but Trump. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Apparently, he just became just another loser. In a single term, he lost presidency, he lost Senate, he lost the House, he was impeached twice, then he went into big lie after he lost the election.
Yeah.
So he exceeded himself.
Yeah, and I know where Mika stands probably, but I mean, don't you think that I don't know. I just what is your thought of it? I mean, the President Biden's not doing everything right. I don't think he's communicated very well to the American people, and he is almost 80 years old. So I don't think his energy level is high. But don't you believe that somehow the Democrats aren't conveying this message, the successes? I mean, I just why is this president in so much trouble today?
Yeah, well, it's Democrats we're famously bad at this. I think Democrats are really bad at sticking to the points where we win, like sticking to policy. We kind of make things, I think, too emotional or too symbolic sometimes. Like, look, Biden isn't as crazy whenever he speaks or tweets as Trump. I mean, that's nice, but the biggest problem with Trump wasn't that he had bad tweets. The biggest problem with Trump is that he had executive. So I agree with everything you said. It seems like inflation scares have been massively over-exaggerated. Some of it is due to Fed policy, which is done by Jerome Powell, which is a Trump appointee, and he was doing it under the Trump administration. But a good section of it is because of supply chains, and another section of it is because of the market power of really large firms. We have 4 meat producers, we have 2 diaper producers. Whenever you have such market power, they can coordinate the increase of prices. And this has been well documented. They've said, our inputs are causing us to raise prices. But then they raise prices and they have profits like they've never seen it before. So inflation has been kind of the biggest cudgel to the Biden administration. And it's unfortunate because I really hope Democrats can convey the message that it's really not all his fault. It's especially not his fault. That it's not even the government's fault fully.
Yeah, I agree. Mark Lee, any thought? Mika, thank you for that perspective.
No, I appreciate that. Great perspective. And I definitely agree that he's not given the kind of credit that he deserves. And part of it is, as you just said, Steve, his communication style. He definitely got caught up in that whole political notion, being a lifelong politician. And I think that sometimes can hurt a politician if they are not able to give that same kind of charisma that they might have had at a younger age or that they might have had early in their career. And I'm not even 100% sure that Biden ever had that kind of charisma. So I never was expecting to have a Kennedy or a Obama-like presidency from him. I think that he's always been kind of that teacher, professor kind of mentality is the kind of image that folks give of him. And now it's kind of like that old wise grandfather kind of image and all of that. And that can work in a presidency if you know how to sell it effectively. And I'm not sure that he is a good salesman. I mean, we've seen some presidents that definitely had that kind of image, even if we want to go back in history, even though he wasn't all that much, he was not nearly the age of Biden now, but even like the Roosevelts had kind of that image of being kind of the grandfatherly figure and along those lines. And of course, they were much younger than Biden, but grandfathers were also much younger sometimes in that time frame as well. I did have a quick question. Well, one, I want to make sure that we are pronouncing the name correctly, because I do believe in doing that. And I think that we probably all gone and got it wrong a couple of times. This is the correct pronunciation, Makai?
It's Micah.
Micah.
No? Sorry.
Micah. I just want to make sure I was getting it. So Micah, the question I was going to ask for you is a couple of questions. And one of them is, I'll just go with one of the things that happened in south of you, because you were over there in the Texas area and all of that. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts and concerns about being a journalist and sometimes journalism not being the safest profession? Because I've heard that definitely, just down from you in Mexico, 8 journalists have been slain so far this year. And that actually makes Mexico one of the most dangerous countries in the Western Hemisphere for for journalists and media workers. At least 148 have been murdered since 2000. And we do know that there's a lot of drug traffic and other things that are going on there, even though there are a lot of very honest citizens also in South America and particularly Mexico. So I'm actually one of those people, as folks know on this network, that does not mind us having open borders, and particularly even from Mexico and Latin America. But I was just wondering your thoughts, one, about the safety of being a journalist, and two, about the whole Latin American situation coming from Texas, and that being a issue that is very dear to the hearts of many of you folks in the Texas area.
100%. Thank you so much. I'll actually agree with your opinion on border policy. I think that people kind of overemphasize the importance of, I guess, we're like slowing down immigration. It's like you think we're going to be overwhelmed with immigrants. It's like we're a country built on immigrants. There's clear economic benefits. It's funny. There's a lot of people in economics. It's surprisingly smaller number than Republicans would like to say, but there is some economists in the Republican party, and every time the Republicans start talking about immigration, they just want to cover their ears, because the traditional economic idea is that immigration is just good. Like, it's just a fundamentally good thing for the economy in 99% of cases. In terms of being a journalist, I'm not going to say that I've ever experienced any danger, although I have seen the situations where it could be dangerous. Even at the University of Houston, we are a very liberal school. When the conservatives are there, man, it is just surprising how aggressive the situation can be. I always go to speak with them whenever they're out. They have their "Let's Go Brandon" flags, and we had Ann Coulter at our school recently, and that was just so fun. And I'm going to speak with them, and just such incredibly aggressive behavior as soon as they know who you are. And so I think partisanship is threatening the safety of people. I think that really the biggest threat is the rise of militias. I think that people talk about Antifa, also right-wing militias. That is a very serious situation, especially for people who are trying to be journalists, because we know that during Black Lives Matter, there were journalists attacked, not just by the police, which is bad enough, but also by right-wing militias. So I think it's unfortunately becoming more dangerous to be a journalist that's reporting on political topics.
Yeah, speaking of danger, right immediately following this show, we're going to have Dr. Paul Hamilton, who's a candidate for U.S. Senate, will be on the show. He's actually in Kentucky, and he used to be a professor at Marshall University, and now is running for the U.S. Senate. The other thing is the Ukraine show is like our #1 on our network, and they supplied us with this little clip. Just want everybody to take a look at it and see what you think.
Від Конгресу США
Слава Україна!
до Ради Європи. За місяць війни до нашої боротьби долучилися найвпливовіші організації, компанії та люди світу. Леонардо Ді Капріо, Міла Куніс, Ілон Маск, Девід Бекхем.
Я передаю свій інстаграм-аккаунт Харківському перинатальному центру.
І тепер ніхто і ніколи не сплутає нас із сусідами.
Ukraine.
І не спитає, де ця Україна. Весь світ з Україною.
It's our support for Ukraine, which apparently has got a lot of press because of the oppression that's going on out there. But I do go on the websites, and there, like I said, there are some people that support the war, and a lot of them are also from one country. You wouldn't believe what country it is. It's Russia. Okay. And the thing is, their media keeps saying, "Oh yeah, this is we're attacking and killing Nazis. They're all Nazis, et cetera, et cetera."
I mean, I don't understand. Yeah, so real quickly, let's shift to some other world issues. I mean, first of all, President Trump and some Republicans are saying that they're praising Putin and expressing skepticism about supporting Ukraine, and Ukraine is accusing Russian forces of executing civilians in a Kiev suburb, and then around the world, Imran Khan, Pakistan's prime minister, is headed off an effort by the opposition to oust him. But lots of stuff going on around the world. But what are your thoughts about? I just don't see how any leader, Republican or Democrat, can say that Putin is not a tyrant. I just think this is just ridiculous. And really, that's all I have to say about that matter.
But getting to another matter, and I'd love to hear Makai's
Yeah.
thoughts about this, and we kind of alluded to it earlier and everything. But another issue that has come up and everything is the whole notion of gun control. And we do know that there was another recent gun shooting in California and all of that. So I was just wondering what Makai's thoughts were about gun control and some of those things, since we are seeing more incidences where people are calling for gun control because of incidents that are happening, even one that was recently happening in Sacramento. So any thoughts about this notion of gun control and whether that is an issue that you young people are concerned about?
We just had our state Democratic convention, and there was people there for the March for Our Lives. And I think we all appreciate their effort, because it is clear that the approach that we have had to firearms in the United States has not been successful. You look at the frequency of mass shootings in other countries, and then you look at the United States and you say, what is the variable that differentiates us from them? Why are we struggling so much more? And I don't think that you could reasonably say that the prevalence of firearms, the fact that we have more firearms than people in the United States, is not one of the components of why we struggle with this. Now, personally, I don't think it's a successful strategy to go around saying we're going to just claim all the assault weapons, right? Because we know that small firearms like pistols are actually just as frequently, if not more frequently, used than assault weapons. I'm personally a gun owner myself. I own an old Yugoslavian 8mm Mauser, and I don't think that's a type of problematic firearm. I think we need to have gun registration, as has been successfully done in multiple other countries, where people have to prove that they have some sort of reason for this, that the government knows they have this weapon, and they could do a basic background check. It was probably more extensive than the ones we currently have, and we could even implement some sort of basic psychiatric pass that you have to go through, a basic class that you have to go through. Just like you need a license to drive a car, you should need a license to have a firearm, which is made for killing people. And I think after that, then you can have more extensive bans on the manufacturing of really dangerous weapons. We banned the construction of assault weapons for civilian use. I think under Reagan, we did that. Nobody complained. Maybe we should do that for more types of firearms as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If I can just jump on one other issue that I was curious about your thoughts on and everything, and that's that whole issue of a woman's right, or the whole Roe versus Wade. I know that's been a very interesting issue in Texas. So I was just wondering your stance on it, as well as what you're hearing from not just yourself, but maybe even some of your fellow students and other folks that are involved, because we do know that Texas has been very much at the forefront of both that issue as well as the voting issues as well, with gerrymandering and some of the other things that are going on. So I may get to that one as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about a woman's right to choose and where we are with Roe versus Wade.
Unfortunately, we really are just the battlefront of almost every fight, and it's usually because the Republicans are doing something crazy. I actually have these pins on my table that I just got the other day. It says, "Queer for Planned Parenthood. I stand with Planned Parenthood." We all support the cause of women fighting for the right to choose in Texas. The reality is, despite the fear mongering of plenty of Republican politicians, the massive majority of abortions are happening before the point in which fetuses can feel pain or have any of this sort of major nervous system activity. And so they always talk about like these late-term abortions like they're decisions that women just make. They just want to carry a fetus for that long, and then they last minute decide they want to have an abortion. And the reality is people usually do that for very, very good reasons, and because they made the decision with their doctor, because of medical reasons, risks to the mother, and so on. So we all support that effort. We all love to see the efforts of Texas be ruled completely unconstitutional. I know an element of them have been kind of countered, but there still are a massive problem. And fundamentally, the people of my generation are as pro-choice as they can be, and rightfully so. Rightfully so.
Hey, Sasha, I could go and ask all kinds of questions of this young man and everything, but I don't want to take over all of the time here, and I'm sure you may have some questions as well, being another statesman of this network that you might want to ask the young people. So I'm going to turn it over to Sasha and Steve. Maybe they've got questions for Mr. Mackay as well, or Micah.
Well, I guess my question, I'll start, Sasha, just
Go
to get a
ahead, go
useful
ahead, sir.
perspective.
Go ahead.
You know, there's been talk about the war of attrition and the fact that that the longer the war goes on, Russia's in trouble, and been some talk about a post-Putin Russia. But do you believe that's a little too premature, or do you think that this president's overreached and he's in real trouble?
I think we can kind of get into wishful thinking, right? I'm half Iranian. The Iranian government has messed up a lot. The people hate them. The people hate the mullahs. They hate Khamenei. And is he gone? No, he's not gone, right? They're still in power. And despite our wishing that they're gone, they're still there. And so I think that we should always be prepared for the situation in which some sort of regime change happens in Russia. We certainly should not try to do it ourselves because we have a very terrible track record of successfully changing regimes, that's for sure. But I think it's very important that if that situation happens, we do something very different than what we did after the fall of the Soviet Union. After the fall of the Soviet Union, I think the West really failed to incorporate Russia into the Western order economically and politically. And that was against the wishes of a lot of Russians who were kind of done fighting with the West. And that's why we're having a sort of a Cold War 2.0, just this time with a weaker Russia. We need to stop fighting with Russia, right? Russian people don't want it. And there's plenty of ways that we could facilitate stronger cooperation. So I think that if there's a regime change, we have to make sure we prioritize making sure this never happens again.
Yes. I mean, I think that's the danger, right? Is Sasha, your perspective, premature thinking? Do you think the longer the war, the Ukrainian resistance seems to be much stronger than we thought? Now, obviously, Putin has miscalculated initially. That's what some people are saying. But or do you believe that our intelligence is off and that the longer it goes on, he's got a chance to win this thing?
Unfortunately, we are dealing here with incredible intellectual laziness and incapacity of the United States and the West, where they don't take the opportunity whenever it comes its way. As I said many times, the worst, in my opinion, president of the United States of all time is George W. Bush, the senior. When Soviet Union fell apart, and for a song, or even less than that, United States could completely disarm Russia or whatever remains of Russia, take all their nuclear arsenal, even and dictate almost anything what they wanted at the time. They failed. Right now, when there are so many anti-West policies spread around the world, like China, Russia, this stupid little Hungary and some other countries, they are trying to, first of all, help Russia to avoid sanctions. But not only that, they are devising different mechanisms to conduct their trades in different currency rather than United States dollar. So they're trying to undermine West economy, West currency exchange, all the Western system when became built up back in Bretton Woods Convention. They're all taking that apart. And right now, Ukraine, single-handedly, with a little help, with heavy arms available, they can just defeat Russia. They can take war to the Russian territory. Remember, the Second World War, it's not Russia who won the war. It was Ukraine who won the war. Ukrainian armies attacked Germany. It was Ukrainian front number one, the number two. There were 4 Ukrainian fronts and 2 Belarusian fronts. I'm not aware of any Russian front against Germany. There were none. So right now, Ukraine can easily defeat. If they're going face to face in a combat, Russians are running and they're giving up all their arms and so on. They cannot fight Ukraine one-on-one. What they can do is hide behind the heavy artillery and just keep bombarding the cities and killing innocent people and children. That's all what they can do. They are criminals, liars, have to be defeated. West needs to do everything possible and impossible and give Ukraine everything what it's needed, multiplied 5 times. There is no Russia, no Kremlin, nothing to worry about. for
Yeah,
children.
I think you're right. And that's a good point. Instead of getting into premature thinking or positive thinking and wasting our energies on what a post-Putin Russia would look like, let's focus our energies on doing what we can to support Ukraine as much as possible so that he does lose the war. That's a great
Yeah,
point. So all this
that makes a lot.
conjecture is, yeah,
That makes a
I
lot of
agree.
sense. I did have one other quick question. Like I said, I'm glad to have this young guest, and I actually had a very interesting conversation with a new friend that is a teacher, and we were talking about the state of education. I know that's one of Nick's favorite plots and favorite talking points is the state of education and all of that. And they were actually thinking that one of the problems is that we've gone away from they've saying there's a difference between a teacher and an educator. That's what the young lady was saying. And they felt that we needed more educators and less teachers. But as a person that is in the school system, you went through high school, you're now in college, I was wondering what your thoughts were about the actual teaching system and whether you feel you've gotten a good education or whether you think that we have fallen behind in Western education. Okay.
I think it's really unfortunate the situation we're having with education discourse because it seems to be fully occupied by people who have not been in the system for a very long time. The most people who are the most interested in the ongoings of education policy are maybe parents, sometimes just random conservatives, and they tend to be very concerned about critical race theory. And really a lot of these bizarre ideas, which I mean, any student could tell you that's not something that we ever went over. This is not something that we have. Um, I think we are lagging behind other countries in terms, like statistically speaking, especially for how much money we put into the system. And it's because we just have a really, really poor way of organizing it, right? One of the areas that I think is really upsetting and frustrating about our current higher education system and how it interacts with our high schools is that we have to do dual credit or take AP courses in order to get college credit for them. So that means that the majority of students are having to take the full 4 years to get their bachelor's. In other countries, the average student's taking 3 years to get their bachelor's because it's kind of automatically recognized that if you learn something in high school and you pass the class, well, it's good enough for that to count in college. So I think we need to have a lot more reforms in how we structure the interaction between high schools and college. And I also think we need to change our funding distribution between school districts so kids in one school district don't get way more funding than kids in another school district, which is a problem in Texas, but it's also a massive problem in many democratic states like California.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense.
The great equalizer.
Yep. Last thing, I know we're going to turn it over to Steve and have his closing remarks and everything. You've alluded to it a couple of times, and you definitely have that Iranian background. But I was wondering what your thoughts are about where we are with race relations. I know that it's a very popular topic. It's sometimes the thing that they even tease me about too much for bringing it up here. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as to where we are in the race relations, or as our panelist who's not here on today calls it, rice relations, when he's being a little bit fun and all of that. But definitely Chris sometimes teases me and uses that term. But what is your thought about where we are in the relationship of race and culture? Because you also are from a different culture.
Yeah. At UH, we're the most diverse school in the country. We're pretty proud of that. I'm always accompanied by friends of different races. And I'd say among young people, it's really not much of an issue. Now, I'd say that in the country, though, it is a big issue because a lot of people are confused about the discourse we're having. It seems like the country's having two different conversations and both are unaware of the other conversation the other side is having. We're talking about systemic racism, right? How basically if you're born and your skin is this color, you're much less likely to own a home, right? Your average household wealth is going to be 1/10, maybe 1/100, depending on what race you belong to. This is what we're talking about. And it seems like a lot of people on the right side of the political spectrum just think, we want to rig it. We want to have it where just people get specific privileges based on the race, which is just not the case. So I would love to see people move towards kind of a view that if we really believe in equal opportunity, we should make sure everybody of any racial, ethnic, national background starts in life with some basic things guaranteed with them, a basic floor that they can build off of so that they can have success in their life. And I think we all need that, right? The saying goes, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. People don't realize that this is originally a statement that's supposed to show that that's just impossible. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? We need someone to help us up. And I think that our social system itself should make sure it does that to people equally of all races.
Nikki, Mika, sorry, anything about critical race theory? What would you comment on that?
Anything about, well, it's a law school idea, right? Usually what Republicans mean when they say critical race theory is just teaching that there is systemic racism and racism exists, which is not critical race theory. It's just a true fact about reality. So I think it's good that we teach kids about the reality they grew up in. America, it has a history that is kind of really deeply involved with racism, whether we want to admit it or not. But critical race theory, that's what they're learning in law school, not in preschools.
I hear you and everything. Steve, I think it's time for you to wind down. Makai, I hope that you will come back on a future edition of the show. I enjoyed hearing your young perspective, and hopefully you can come back on future editions. And I'm sure that Nick might make that possible and everything. But I, for one, would like to see you come back and give us a little bit of a different perspective and a younger perspective. But maybe Steve will mention something about that in our closeout as well. But Steve, I'm turning it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. And it was definitely an inspiration hearing from Mika Arfan on our show, of which I think exemplifies a new perspective. It was at the end of Star Wars where we said a new hope. And I'm a Star Wars fan. I believe in the Jedi, but perhaps the next chapter of this country's history will be from young men like Mika, my daughter, my son Ryan, these other young leaders that bring to them a new perspective. One, the fact that we can draw inspiration from our nation's history, our founding, that they gave a promise that we're all created equal. But sometimes I think that preamble in our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, which I enjoyed watching in the musical Hamilton in New York, front row seat to the Rogers Theater, where I think it really was a challenge that we're all created equal and that we're never a perfect union. And that is something I think that these children appreciate. If we're going to make America more perfect, we need to start building what is broken. And I think that Mika Irfan exemplified that so well in his talk to us today. And building on that, as we end this show on World Edition today, we must also look upon democracy and autocracy. First of all, I want to wish the Carolina Hurricanes all the best, as we're going to be really ready for a great game here for the national championship. Wishing Hugh Davis all the best, where we can get the monkey out the back and beat Kansas. But most importantly, I think it's a challenge for all of us to not take democracy for granted. If there's anything we can learn from the crisis in Ukraine, it's that democracy is worth, as I've said before, time and time again, not only worth fighting for, but worth dying for. And the people of Ukraine are certainly doing that. Oftentimes, it's easy for countries to succumb to dictatorships, autocracy. Things can get done. It's easier. Democracy, as Andrew Shepard said, the president, an American president, is advanced citizenship. That presidency was played by Michael Douglas. You've got to want it real bad. At the end of the day, the democracies that are successful are liberal democracies, one that have a strong state, but respect the individual rights of a society, human rights, civil rights. In America, we can burn the flag in front of a man who defended or gave his life defending that freedom, fighting for the flag of the United States of America. It's a hard balance. It's hard work. It's not easy. And unfortunately, many parts of the world are falling to the easy path. One supreme leader, one leader that does it all, that doesn't take into account the freedoms and wills of the people. That's what this war in Ukraine is about. And as Sasha Starr said, and all of us have said, let us not only pray for Ukraine, but do what we can to give to an organization helping them on the front lines. I think it's World Ukraine. Google it, find out. We pray for the families of Sacramento. We'll talk about gun violence a little bit tomorrow. From our family to yours, we will wish you all the best on World Edition. Go Tar Heels. This is Steve Rao signing off, and I'll be back tomorrow morning on this great show with our global family. Have a great evening, wherever you are.